In its short history of statehood, Oklahoma has been home to an impressive list of sons and daughters who have made a major impact on American business, culture, and history. In the field of education, it is Dr. Francis Tuttle, whose vision and dedication to vocational and technical education that has provided a skilled, ready-made workforce for American industry.
Hello, I'm Kay Martin, and I'm CEO and Superintendent of Francis Tuttle Technology Center in Oklahoma City. A pioneer is defined as one who ventures into unknown territory, an innovator. And to many of us, Dr. Francis Tuttle was considered a pioneer. Our state-of-the-art facilities, our talented and dedicated faculty and staff, tied with the wonderful support of business and industry, these are all the benefits that we enjoy because of his dedication, his vision, and his wisdom.
Francis Tuttle is proud to present this brief look at a man that Oklahoma Today magazine named one of Oklahoma's most influential people of the 20th century. The 1920s and 30s were challenging decades for most Oklahomans, but for a farm boy from Wellston, Oklahoma, named Francis Tuttle, these difficult times instilled many qualities that would serve him well throughout his career. Qualities like the necessity for hard work, fiscal responsibility, and most of all, teamwork. It was also here in rural Oklahoma where he met his wife, Vivian.
I knew him through, well, of course, in a small high school, I knew him quite well. And so we started dating then. And then the next year, then he went to Connors, to college. He got a job and went the first 2 years at Connors. We continued to, well, we dated other people, but we continued. And then the year he came up here for his junior year, we got married that year and finished here in Stillwater. And his first job then was in Gotebo as an ag teacher.
Francis soon learned that his academic background wasn't the only reason he was chosen for his first teaching position in 1940.
He was asked if, when he went out to visit some of the farmers, if they knew why they hired this one man did. Said, "Do you know why they hired you?" And he said, "Well, no." He presumed it was because of his qualifications, and he said no, said they could get you cheaper than they could get a good one.
In 1944, Uncle Sam needed Francis Tuttle's skills half a world away. After completing an 18-month tour of duty as an education officer in the Philippines, Francis Tuttle resumed his career in the Oklahoma public education system. After years of honing his teaching skills in the front lines of the classroom, his talents and abilities were put to the test as an administrator in several Oklahoma school systems. He soon began to realize that the needs of certain students were not being addressed.
There were large numbers of unemployed at the schools that I seemed to get a job at. And my observation there led me to believe that the educational system was missing over half of the people, and that those people were just dropping through the crack. They were not interested in the academics. They wanted something different.
In 1963, the National Vocational Education Act was enacted, which created state-operated vocational technical school systems. It also marked the next phase of Francis Tuttle's career. In 1964, he was appointed as the first state coordinator of the Oklahoma Vocational Technical System. To gain insight on how best to design this new system, Dr. Tuttle joined a group of Oklahoma educators and politicians on a legendary fact-finding trip to South Carolina.
It was probably a 4-passenger plane on which there were 150 people. But it was a large delegation. It was a very large delegation. I remember it because it was such an eye-opener for us.
Upon their return, the planning team devised the Oklahoma Area Vocational Technical System, which introduced numerous innovations and created timely programs with an emphasis on quality education. Dr. Tuttle's leadership, vision, and talent for getting things done paved the way for his appointment as State Director of Oklahoma's Vocational Technical System, replacing J.B. Perkey in 1967.
He had the roots from vocational agriculture, which made him acceptable to a team of community leaders across this state that gave him a solid foundation of being state director.
We had to move from agriculture and oil dependence into the manufacturing sector, diversify our jobs that we had, improve the quality of jobs that we had, and much ahead of his time, Dr. Tuttle saw that and saw the importance of providing the right kind of technical education to allow our economy to grow and to expand.
I guess one of the things that Dr. Tuttle did in our vocational education system, which is very unique, is that he established funding for the area vocational technical schools through the ad valorem tax. This is a fund that doesn't have to be voted on every year.
Now, if we're going to do a program, we're going to do it well. And it'll be a high quality program. It'll be one that we'll be proud of and the industry will be proud of it. And that we will use those people who are going to employ our graduates as sounding posts and advisory positions to help us develop the kind of curriculum it'll take to accomplish all that.
He truly believed we could deliver on time, in time, just in time training years ago for business and industry wishing to relocate or locate in our state. That was his greatest accomplishment, the area vocational technical system.
Now, I've been president of the University of Central Oklahoma, so I've been in common education and I've been in higher education. The remarkable thing about what we called VOTEC, and I have that tendency to want to say it, is that it's overnight. You can call up Dr. Tuttle, you can call up Roy Peters, you can call up anyone and say, this is what we need, and they'll say, we'll start a course tomorrow.
The power structure, the Chamber of Commerce types, the financial interests, all were interested in economic development. And because vocational education began to get plaudits for its support of that economic development, it changed the political atmosphere.
He could walk the halls of the legislature. They didn't think of him as being the Democratic governor's representative. They didn't think of him as being all of that. He was representing VOTEC.
I think Dr. Tuttle was able to work with Democrats as well as Republicans because they accept him as the professional person he was. They didn't look at him having a political agenda, and they realized that he would try to service all the citizens, all the constituents of any of the leaders, legislative leaders in the state, as well as the governors.
During his tenure as state director, Dr. Tuttle was asked to serve as a U.S. State Department representative on various overseas fact-finding missions. Those travels led to an international exchange of ideas and goodwill between the United States and other countries involved in vocational education.
Dr. Tuttle was an international diplomat, traveled internationally extensively, was a consultant in many foreign countries, and was an advisor to most other states. And if you go to other states and look at their voc ed system, particularly the good parts of it, you'll see tracks of Francis Tuttle around.
One of my memories, just so I can share it, is an industrial trip to China. And he was a rather tall man, a rather striking, larger fellow, a very husky, muscular guy, and carried himself erect and well. And in China, most of the natives were smaller than we were, so he just kind of stood out over the people we were visiting. And we had this great banquet where they were honoring the governor of Oklahoma and the Secretary of Commerce and all this sort of stuff. And he was late. He arrived about 30 minutes into the dinner, and you immediately knew why. He got a standing ovation when he walked into the room. He had visited a clothing district, and they made him a Chinese kind of uniform suit. And he walked into the crowd with that on, and the Chinese were ecstatic. I mean, he identified with that crowd, and he was the star without saying a word. They just stood and applauded. And here he was, towering over all of his hosts, and they were just clapping and beaming. And he was helping us with our relationship. In dealing in the international business, for example, you first have to establish a relationship. They're not looking for a good business deal. They're a lot more patient than we are. We want to go over there and sign a deal, cut a deal, sign a contract, and get home. In the Orient, particularly in Asia, they had the patience of Job. They'll wear you out. And he immediately established a relationship that none of the rest of us could do. And I'll never forget that when he walked in, that look he had. And that was King Tut to me.
In 1979, the Board of Education for Vocational Technical School District 21 in northwest Oklahoma City broke ground and began construction on a $7.5 million vocational training facility. In 1982, the board unanimously voted to name their newest facility the Francis Tuttle Area Vocational Technical Center.
We talked about capital VOTEC, but somehow that just didn't do it for me. And so I thought, I really think that we ought to name the school after Francis. He's the one that developed the area school program from the very beginning. And as a matter of fact, I discussed it with him before I even broached any of the board members and said, what would you think? And he was, again, humble and appreciative and embarrassed almost.
And I remember one day, this would be probably about 1985, walking into a Capitol office, a House member's office, and the secretary was typing away, obviously on some sort of deadline. And she did recognize that we were there, and so while she was typing, she said, "Can I help you?" And Dr. Tuttle said, "Yes, we're here to see Representative so-and-so." And she said, "He's busy right now. Can I tell him who's calling?" And Dr. Tuttle said, "Yes, my name is Francis Tuttle, and this is Roy Peters." And she suddenly stopped talking, and she looked up, and she said, "Francis Tuttle? I go to night school at Francis Tuttle." And he said, "Yes, my mother named me after that school."
The honorees of the evening, Francis and Vivian Tuttle.
Dr. Tuttle retired in 1986 after 46 years of service in Oklahoma's public education system. His retirement was short-lived, however, when he was unexpectedly asked to serve as Oklahoma's Secretary of Commerce by Governor Nye.
My friend, Francis Tuttle, is retired from the VOTEC system. I was there at his retirement. I loved and admired him. I said, he's the most natural guy there is. So I said, "Get me Francis Tuttle." They said, "Well, he's playing golf. He said he'll call you later." I said, "I don't want him to call me later. You tell him this is the governor." That's one of the few times I ever said, "This is the governor." I said, "I want to talk to him right now because I'm getting ready to make an announcement." And they got him, and he accepted. It was a wonderful job for him, and he did a great job.
The many recognitions he received over the years gives credence to the enormous impact his career has had on Oklahoma's educational system.
When he was elected president of the AVA, he was pretty proud of that. And so he flew my sister and brother and I to Las Vegas to see the induction ceremony and so on, and we were duly impressed. Because I'd been in vocational education, had some idea of what AVA was and the extent of the organization, but my brother and sister were not as familiar, and they were pretty impressed. It was a nice ceremony.
Dr. Tuttle passed away in February 1997, but his contributions to vocational education live on in technology centers all across America. His dedication, leadership, and vision have made the Oklahoma career and technical education system a benchmark by which other centers throughout the nation are measured.
One of our current area school superintendents in a very large area school, when Francis Tuttle, the school, was being built, would love to call the school, and the receptionist would always, of course, answer the phone, Francis Tuttle. And this superintendent would say, yes, I'd like to speak with Francis Tuttle. And the receptionist every time would have to go through, well, Francis Tuttle is in Stillwater, he's the state director of VOTAC, and this is the school named after him. And the superintendent would pause appropriately and say, fine, I'd like to talk to Francis Tuttle. And the poor receptionist would feel duly harassed. Dr. Tuttle got word that was going on what he thought was a little too regular basis, and called the superintendent and said, I think we've had about as much fun with this as we need to have. and needless to say, the superintendent stopped doing that. But he was a neat person to be around, just to be in any kind of situation. Because he did love life and loved people, and had lots of fun living his life.
He was a very firm man, but he had this genteel feeling about him that people identified with, and very few people have that combination.
He was a nice man. He was one of the nicest people that I ever met. As I said, very humble, even though he had risen to the position that he was and was held in such esteem by people all over the nation, and yet was very much still the Wellston farm boy that he grew up to be.
Certainly no one man could do all these things, but I think he was very good at getting people on board with his ideas and having them work very hard to help him accomplish those things.
He's done a remarkable job over the years, and we've missed him dearly. And I think that, of course, he's left his legacy with probably the best technology education system in the entire nation. So I think he's made his mark, and he's probably up in heaven teaching new skills at the pearly gates.